Good morning, everyone. So, y'all look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, right? So, some of you still have bedhead. Anyway, thanks for coming out this morning. Last night was an awesome, Alan did an awesome block of instruction last night to some of the older members of the church, and they enjoyed it so much. A lot of them are going to come back for the second portion tonight. At least they said so last night. So, at any rate, a couple housekeeping notes. Plenty of food back there to help yourself with. There's coffee over there if you adults or kids if you want coffee. And if you need an extra copy of the handouts, there's some back there. There's plenty back there. So go grab you some if you want one of those. Kind of what's going to happen is after we finish this first block, after Alan speaks in this first block of instruction, then he's going to, we're going to break for about 30 minutes and we'll have some food, and the food will be in here. I'll explain more to you later about that when we break. But anyway, oh, by the way, for those of you that are new or don't know who I am, I'm Mark. I'm the student pastor here at Redeemer. So we have a special treat this week, all the way from the left coast. Alan Schleman has come to visit us. Alan he's been with an organization called Stand to Reason. It's str.org on the web if you want to look him up. He'll tell you more about his organization later. But I started listening to those guys back in 2013 on my commutes to and from work up in Northern Virginia, and it really was very impactful and helped me work through a lot of things that I was trying to wrestle with scripture-wise and how to engage other people on certain issues and that sort of thing. And I read the book called Tactics. He'll tell you more about that book later that his boss wrote, Greg Kokel, and it was a game changer for me. So he's going to be teaching a little bit out of that book today. I'll let him explain that later. But anyway, Alan has been with STR for 18 years, and he travels around the country, even internationally, right? Do you travel international? Okay. Does Canada count as international? Or Mexico?
It does.
Okay. All right. Anyway, but anyway, they're great guys. He's got a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University in California. So he was gracious enough to come do an extended session with us last night. And then he sat down with me for about 45 minutes and did a podcast. So, that podcast that we have, Rescued and Redeemed, it's part of the youth ministry. I'll have the podcast up probably later this weekend or maybe for early next week. You know how to navigate to that. It's on Spotify. It's called Rescued and Redeemed. Or you can go to our student page on the website, and it's got a link there. It'll take you right to it. So a lot of good information, a lot of stuff he's not going to talk about today that we talked about during that sit-down interview. So be on the lookout for that. Also, we're recording the sessions, so we'll at least have the audio on the podcast, and we'll probably have the video presentations up on the Facebook page, student page, sometime next week. So for those that don't get to see it, or if you want to look at it again and want to catch something, all right? So I encourage you to take notes, and Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Just going to move a couple things here, just get a little extra space. Good morning, everyone. I was telling the group last night that ethnically, my people group is a small Christian minority from the country of Iraq. We're called Assyrians. If you've read any parts of the Old Testament, you'll probably recall the Assyrians are talked a lot about in the Old Testament, which sounds kind of cool. Unfortunately, if you study world history, you'll also find out that the Assyrians are talked a lot about. And we were known for our brutality. So that's kind of unfortunate. We were just like really, really violent people. So we would take over a people group, or we would attack a people group, and not only would we defeat them, but we just loved to humiliate them and make a spectacle of them, We were known for chopping off people's heads and then throwing their heads against the walls. We would gouge out people's eyeballs. We'd skin people alive. We would take our enemies' dead bodies, put them on spears, light their bodies, and use their burning bodies as light for our parties at night. We're a lot nicer now. I haven't hurt anybody today, so be of good cheer. If you have a question, I won't kill you. We're we're a lot more friendly now, so that's good news. In fact, if you read the story of Jonah and the great fish, you recall Jonah was told to go to Nineveh, right, to preach to the people of Nineveh. Well, Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. That was my people group. So you can see why Jonah was reluctant to go there, because like, these guys are like horrible, you know? You want them to become followers of God? Forget that. Anyways, enough about my problems. Let's talk about what we're here to discuss. And many years ago, before I worked here at Stand to Reason, I was working as a physical therapist, and I worked in Los Angeles, there at a hospital. And as you know, Los Angeles is a very ethnically diverse city. Like, people from all over the world travel to Los Angeles to live and to work there. And one of my friends, who was a coworker, a physical therapist as well, he was from India. His name was Raj. We were good friends. And so one day, Raj invited me to have lunch with him. So I said, sure, let's go to lunch. So we're in Los Angeles. We're eating fish tacos, which are super popular in Los Angeles. And my friend Raj tells me the news. I said, well, what is it, Raj? He said, Alan, I'm going to be getting married. I'm like, oh, hey, congratulations, Raj. I'm so excited for you. So I asked my friend Raj a question. I said, Raj, are you going to have an American-themed wedding, or are you going to have more like a Hindu-themed wedding? He said, oh, I'm going to have a Hindu-themed wedding. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, is Hinduism something that's important to you? And he said, yeah, Hinduism is important to me. I said, cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, do you believe Hinduism is true? He said, yeah, I think Hinduism is true. I said, cool. So I asked him another question. I said, Raj, do you believe all religions are true? Like, not just Hinduism, but Buddhism and Islam and Christianity and Judaism and so on and so forth. And he thought about that question for just a moment, and he goes, yeah, I think pretty much all religions are basically the same. Now, at this point of the conversation, I came to realize my friend Raj is what we would call a religious pluralist. Like, obviously, that's not the term he used, but this is just the term to refer to a person who believes all religions are true. You can't say any one religion is more true than another, or any one religion is more false than another. Now, as a follower of Jesus Christ, those are not my convictions. I don't believe that. And so I wanted to convince my friend Raj to abandon this idea, to get rid of this idea that it's possible that all religions could be true. And so I asked him one final question, and here was my question. I said, Raj, what would you think about a religion that believes that there is a God who is physical in nature, and this God is the size of a football field, and this God hovers on the far side of the moon, so you can't ever see this God with like a telescope, and this God is responsible for controlling the weather on our planet? I said, would you believe that that religion is also true? And he thought about it for a moment, and he started to smile. He goes, yeah, he goes, okay. He goes, all right. He goes, I take it back. Not all religions are true, only the ones that make sense. And so notice, he backed away from his initial claim that he thought all religions could be true. Now, I want you to notice what I didn't do in that conversation. Notice I didn't tell him he was wrong. Notice I didn't tell him that religious pluralism is false. Notice I didn't tell him I was a Christian or even defend any aspect of my own Christian views. Yet I was still able to persuade him to abandon the idea that it's possible that all religions could be true. And can anyone here tell me what was the only thing I did in that entire conversation? What did I do? Tell me, yeah. That's right, ask questions. Now, not just any random questions, but a specific line of questioning. And as he answered the questions in his own mind, it was almost as if his own thoughts were convincing him of the idea that I wanted him to believe. In fact, had I said to him, oh, Raj, you believe in religious pluralism, that's false for 3 reasons, and here they are, it's far more likely his defenses would have gone up, and he would have become more resistant to the idea or to the point I was trying to communicate. But because I engaged him with questions, I was able to draw him out and make him think and reconsider his view. Now, this is the habit that I want you to learn to get into as well. I want you to learn to get into the habit of asking good questions, especially when you're in a conversation about your faith or about your beliefs. And so here's my promise to you. In the next 45 or 50 minutes, what I want to do is give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, on any topic, no matter how little you think you know about that topic, and no matter how articulate, educated, or aggressive the other person that you're talking to might be. So that's my promise, is to give you that game plan so you'll know how to maneuver in conversation. But let me just back up here for a moment and just kind of talk about where what I'm about to teach you fits into your life as a Christian. So the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 18 through 20, it says that we are all, if we claim to be a follower of Jesus, that we are all ambassadors for Christ. And so when you think about an ambassador, you think about a person who represents another country. And so the Bible says, hey, look, you're an ambassador for Christ. You represent Jesus in everything that you do and say. And so what that means is, wow, if you're an ambassador, you better have some skills. You better think about how you are representing Jesus. And I would suggest to you that there's three main skills that as an ambassador we need to try to develop: knowledge, wisdom, and character. So knowledge is the information of the message that God wants you to communicate as an ambassador. But of course, just having knowledge is not enough. You have to know how to package that knowledge in a way that's clear and persuasive and uses language that a person can understand. And that's where wisdom comes in. It's an artful method. It's the how do you communicate kind of thing. But even if you had knowledge and wisdom, but you were a jerk when you spoke to people, well, of course, your poor character would completely ruin the message that you're communicating. And so that's why character, which is an attractive manner, is a third essential component of being an effective ambassador. We want to be warm and friendly and kind and gracious and inviting when we engage people, especially on topics that might be controversial or difficult for others to accept. Now, tactics, which is what we're going to be talking about here, is under the wisdom component. It's about the art of engaging people in conversation and learning how to maneuver in that way. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. Now, there's a lot of benefits to this approach, to using questions. And I think if you learn this approach, it'll help you to do a number of things. Number one, it'll help you to present the truth, hopefully biblical truth, in a clear and clever way. So that's certainly a plus. But more importantly, I think this tactic, this approach will help you to choreograph your conversations, your interactions. Now, what do I mean by that? Is anyone here involved in any kind of dance, like jazz, ballet, tap, or anything like that? Okay, a few of you, yeah. So my wife did ballet for many, many years, about 18 or so years. And after she got older, she got to my age, it got harder for her to do ballet, so she got more involved in choreography. Now, choreography is the art of sort of designing in your mind and figuring out how you want a certain set of dancers to perform on stage. And so typically the choreographer is not the one on stage. Usually they're the ones who are off stage, who has in their mind what they want any particular dancer, let's just say it's a ballet dancer, to do. So maybe the choreographer wants a ballet dancer to begin at the very back corner of the stage, and the choreographer wants the dancer to, run across the stage, do a jump, a jeté or whatever they call it, right? Do a twirl, and then end up right over here. Okay, I know it's great form. My wife would be so impressed. And so before that dancer does any of those moves, the choreographer has kind of seen that in their mind, exactly what they want that dancer to do. And so what I want to suggest to you, if you learn how to use questions effectively, it will help you to choreograph your conversations, to kind of see ahead as to what you want to do with the conversation. So rewind back with me to that conversation I had with my friend Raj, the Hindu who worked with me in the hospital. As soon as he told me he's getting married, and as soon as I remembered that he's Hindu, I knew where I wanted to go in that conversation. I could see it in my mind. I thought, okay, now I'm going to use questions to get us to that point. right? So I asked one question that moved our conversation here. Then I asked another question that brought our conversation over here. Then I asked another question that brought our conversation over here, until I kept asking questions and we were right here, and he was forced to answer the question, would you believe in a religion that teaches there's a God on the far side of the moon that controls our weather? Now, I knew he was going to say no, because it's ridiculous to think that. And so what did I do? I used questions to get us here, which then forced him to reconsider his own ideas. And so that's what I mean by questions can help you to choreograph your conversations. But ultimately, the purpose of these questions is to help you to recognize someone else's mistaken thinking for the purpose of guiding them to the truth, and here's a key point, while remaining gracious and charitable. Okay? It's really easy to tell people that they're mistaken if you just want to be rude and be crass and be a jerk, you know? You're wrong. You're stupid. You're an idiot. Like, okay, sure. Yeah, you could always say that, but that's not kind, right? You're not representing Jesus in a gracious way. So if you can learn how to use questions in a gentle way, well, that's a much more effective and gracious way to do it. Now, some of you might be thinking, gosh, Alan, this sounds incredibly manipulative. Like, this sounds like you just want to control people. Like, what sort of, like, daddy issues do you have? You just want to, like, manipulate people. Like, come on. You got to go to some counseling or therapy or whatever. Look, I get it. Yes, this can be potentially abused. And that's because anything powerful can be abused, right? Questions are powerful and they can be abused, right? Automobiles are powerful, right? They're large machines that travel at a very high velocity. And when used appropriately, they can help you to get from point A to point B in a very quick way, right? But of course, when abused, they can injure or kill people. And in the same way, questions are very powerful, and they can be abused. You could use a question, a series of questions to corner people, to make them feel stupid, to make them look foolish. But that's not the reason why I'm trying to teach you these things. I'm trying to teach you the power of questions, to use them in an effective and gracious way. I'm presuming that you want to be a gracious ambassador for Jesus, and you're going to wield questions like a careful surgeon who uses a scalpel to help someone, not like a sword to jab somebody, right, to wound them. So yes, questions can be abused, but that's not the reason why I'm trying to teach you this. Okay. With that in mind, let me ask you a question. When you think about sharing your faith with a non-believer, let's say it's an atheist or maybe a Muslim or perhaps someone who's an abortion choice advocate, how would you rate how you feel about that potential encounter? Are you a number one? Are you the person who's like, yes, I relish that encounter. I can't wait to talk to someone who doesn't share my faith. Where are they? I want to go talk to them and find them right now. Or would you say you're a two? You're like, man, I'm willing to talk to people, but honestly, I'm nervous, I'm uncertain, and I'm scared. Or would you say you're a three? You're like, I pee my pants every time I think about sharing my faith. Okay. So raise your hand if you're a number one. Any number ones in the audience? Anybody who's like, yes, I relish that encounter? Okay, Benjamin's got one. All right, one person, thank you. All right, any number twos? Okay, yeah, I got a few number twos. Yeah, it's majority. Number threes, you try to avoid it? Okay, how many will raise their hand no matter what I ask them? Okay, nobody? Nobody won't, you will raise your hand. Okay, thank you. All right, so let me ask you, why are you nervous, uncertain, or scared? Tell me, what are your fears? What are your worries about it? What's holding you back? Yes. Rejection? Sure. You might present your case or maybe share about your faith and you get rejected. And who likes that? Nobody does. Totally reasonable concern. What might be another concern? Okay, yeah. You start talking about your faith, and that's kind of a touchy subject. Maybe they'll feel uncomfortable, and that might make your relationship sort of strange or awkward, right? So yeah, you don't want to do that because you value your friendships. Totally reasonable concern. Yes?
After a certain point in the conversation, you don't know what to say next.
Okay, yeah. Maybe you make some progress, but after a certain point, you won't know where to go next. You're like, okay, now what? Like, this feels awkward. Okay. Yeah, totally reasonable concern. Yes?
Kind of feel like Moses when he is told to go speak to Egypt. He's like, I'm a bad speaker. Like, I'm not good at this, God. Why do you want me to do this?
That's right.
Very
Okay, yeah, like Moses was concerned, like you might feel like, man, I don't know if I can communicate effectively. And so you're like, well, so I don't know if this is really the right thing for me to do. So yeah, totally reasonable concern. Yes?
Just not wanting to. Like I've done it in the past, but I just don't want to.
Okay, yeah, you might just be like, I don't even want to do it. So even if I wanted to, I would, maybe I couldn't or could or whatever, but I don't even want to do it. I'm not even motivated. So yeah, totally reasonable concern. Yes? Okay, you're concerned about staying gracious, yeah. Like perhaps you find yourself sometimes easily irritated or you get angry. I'm not saying that's you, but I'm just saying examples like it could be you just get, it's hard for you to remain gracious when you're engaging somebody. Yeah, totally reasonable concern, yes. Okay, yeah, you're afraid you might be talking about your faith, telling this person about it, but you might say something wrong, They're like, who's Jesus? You're like, I don't know, he's the Archangel Michael? Oh, shoot, no, he's not. No, he's, that's a Jehovah's Witness belief, but yeah, no, I know you're not going to, you don't mean that kind of crazy stuff, but yeah, you might just say something incorrect, okay? Anything else? Any other reasons you might be fearful, nervous, concerned, or scared? So by the way, when I answer this question, I put myself at a number 2. I'm willing to share my convictions with other people, but I'm oftentimes nervous, uncertain, and scared. Now, keep in mind, I'm the guy who oftentimes gets invited to a secular university, and I'm asked to present my views on some controversial topic like homosexuality or abortion or something like that. And they say, Alan, we will give you 20 minutes to make your case to the university audience. And then after you're done for 20 minutes, we're going to put 2 microphones up at the front of the stage. People are going to line up, and they're going to challenge you. And you got to take this first person at the microphone, and they're going to challenge you, and you have to debate them. And then we go over here to this person, and I have to debate this person. And then we go back to this person, and we go back and forth through all the line. This goes on for an hour and a half. Do I relish that encounter? No! I mean, I'm willing, but I'm nervous, uncertain, and scared. And many of those events I try to avoid. I turn down a lot of those events. Now, why am I nervous, uncertain, and scared? Because I have exactly the same fears that you just mentioned. So notice then, the problem isn't that we have all these fears and concerns that you mentioned. That's normal. We all experience that. It only becomes a problem, though, when those fears or concerns kind of paralyze us from ever wanting to share our faith, from ever stepping out and engaging somebody with our convictions. That's the only time those fears are a problem. I believe, though, if you learn how to use this tactic that I'm going to teach you about using questions, it'll give you the confidence to still share your faith even though you have those fears or concerns that you mentioned. Okay. Now, before I teach you this great tactic of how to ask questions, I have to show you an example of a bad tactic. I have to show you an example of the bad approach. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to show you a video clip from the movie Nacho Libre. How many here have seen Nacho Libre? Raise your hand. Wait a minute. How many have not seen Nacho Libre? What? That's a lot of non-Christians here. That's a lot of non-Christians. Okay. All right. So for those of you who aren't Christians and haven't seen this movie, let me give you a quick rundown on the story. Okay. So it's a comedy. All right. And it's a movie about Nacho Libre, who is the guy in the mask. He's played by the actor Jack Black. Okay. Now he is a Mexican wrestler. Okay? And he also happens to be a Catholic Christian. Now, his wrestling partner, who's the guy there with, flexing there in the back, that's his wrestling partner. Now, in the video clip I'm about to show you, they are about to wrestle these 2 guys named Satan's cavemen, okay? And Nacho Libre has this weird idea. He's like, you know what? How can me and my wrestling partner wrestle Satan's cavemen when my wrestling partner is not a Christian and hasn't even been baptized yet? All right? So I want to show you what approach Nacho uses to convince his friend to get baptized. Let's take a look. Turn it up a little bit.
I'm a little concerned right now about your salvation and stuff. How come you have not been baptized?
Because I never got around to it, okay? Why you always have to be judging me? Because I only believe in science.
But tonight, we are going up against Satan's caveman. And I just thought it would be a good idea if you... Felicidades.
Okay, so Nacho uses sort of a, I don't want to say non-traditional approach to baptism. I'm not sure if that's the way you guys were baptized, but what's the problem with baptizing someone this way? Yeah, it's forced. That's right. Okay. Do you think his wrestling partner now is more convinced or less convinced that getting baptized is a good idea? Yeah, less convinced, right? And that's because when you're forced or pressured to do something, oftentimes you become more resistant to that idea. Your walls go up and you become defensive, right? And oftentimes I think this is a picture of the way we Christians come across to our friends and family who aren't Christian. Because we're so eager for them to come to know Jesus. And so what do? We tell them, man, you got to believe in God. Man, the Bible is the Word of God. You got to trust it. You got to put your faith in Jesus. And all we end up doing is we make statement after statement after statement after statement, telling them what they got to believe or what they got to do. And it comes across like we're just trying to dunk their heads in the water, right? And so this is why I'm suggesting we got to take a different approach than merely just trying to tell people things. And the different approach that I want you to learn is what I call the Columbo tactic. Now, has anyone here ever seen the TV show Columbo? Raise your hand if you've ever seen the TV show. It looks like a couple of you have, yeah. So it's an old TV show. It's no longer being recorded. You might see reruns on maybe Netflix or something like that. But basically, it was about this lieutenant named Lieutenant Columbo, played by this guy. In fact, if you've seen the movie The Princess Bride, the grandpa that reads the story, that's the same actor, okay? So in this TV show, every episode begins this way. There's like crime happens, which you as a viewer see the crime happen. And then Lieutenant Columbo comes on the scene, and he's the one who's supposed to figure out who the criminal is, okay? Now, when he comes on the scene, he appears completely inept, completely incapable of achieving his task. Like sometimes his trench coat looks completely wrinkled. Looks like he slept in it or something, you know. Sometimes his hair is completely disheveled. Looks like he's got bad bedhead. He pulls out a piece of paper to take notes of the crime scene, and he doesn't even have a pen or a pencil. He's like, hey, does anybody have a pen or a pencil? And everyone's looking at this lieutenant thinking, man, how is this guy ever going to figure out who the bad guy is? But the genius of Columbo is he asks a lot of questions. And he comes across very nonchalant, very relaxed, very inquisitive, very disarming, all right? So he might ask one of the suspects, hey, what do you do for a living? And the suspect's like, well, I'm an engineer. And Columbo's like, okay, you're an engineer, cool. Hey, yeah, what do you design? Well, I design bridges. And Columbo's like, oh, you design bridges? Oh, great. And everyone's like, wow, what does that have to do with the investigation? Like, how does that progress this investigation at all? So Columbo's like, well, hey, sorry to waste your time and bother you. Sorry, I got to get going. And he starts to kind of walk away. And he stops before he gets to the door. And he says, I got one more question. And he asks another question. He's like, just one more thing. And he kind of just one more things the person to death, right? By asking a lot of questions. And by doing that, he gets little pieces of information. And eventually he uses those pieces of information to put together the puzzle and figure out who the bad guy is. And then he catches him at the end, right? And so this is why we call this tactic the Columbo tactic. Because at its core, it's about the art of asking questions. It's about using questions instead of statements to be able to make your point or to move forward in a conversation about your faith or about your values. And I'll add, you can use this tactic with absolutely anyone. Like not just non-Christians, but even Christians, your brother, your sister, your youth leader, your parents, your teachers, anybody. Because at its core, all this is about is the art of asking questions, right? Now, let me ask you, what is the value of asking questions? What do questions do for a conversation? Or how do questions make somebody feel? What do you guys think? What do questions do for a conversation? Yeah, Benjamin.
You're getting
They what? Yeah, interrogating, I suppose, that's true. But let's just not think like an FBI interrogator, right? So think of more like a Columbo kind of asking questions. So if you're just asking questions in a calm, collective way, what does that kind of a questioning kind of do? Now, when you say interrogating, what does an interrogator typically try to achieve? Benjamin, you said interrogating. So when you're interrogating somebody, what are you trying to get? Okay. What's that? Okay, information, yeah. So aside from interrogation, which gives you the idea of this really aggressive attack, right? You do want to get information, absolutely. So questions certainly give you information about the other person. Good, okay. What else do questions do? Yeah. They open things up? Yeah. So they open up the conversation. They make a person a little bit more willing to share things. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, yeah. When you ask a person a question, it makes them feel important because you're asking them about their opinion, their views, their ideas, and that kind of validates them as somebody who you care about to hear that information. Sure. What else do questions do? Yes? Make them feel smart? Yeah, perhaps, so provided that when they answer their questions, they're saying something intelligible and coherent. Absolutely. So, yeah, that could make them feel good or at least affirm them in some way. Sure. What else do questions do? Yes? Yeah. So maybe you have an idea about someone, but it's incorrect. And so when you ask them questions about their view, it might correct your misunderstanding about the other person. That's right. What else do questions do? Anything else? Yes? Okay, yeah, questions can start a conversation. Maybe you don't know where to go. And so you just begin by, hey, let me just ask you some questions about you. Right? Absolutely. Yes? Yeah, sure. So by asking them questions about their views, you'll understand kind of their approach, their perspective, where they're coming from, right? And by better understanding them, you'll better understand exactly where you might want to go next. Sure. So yeah, these are all true. Questions are very interactive. They're disarming. They show interest in the other person. They validate the other person. People typically love to talk and they love to hear themselves talk. So sometimes that's helpful as well. And as I illustrated in my original conversation with my friend Raj, questions can also help you sometimes make your point without ever stating your case. Okay? So that's also helpful as well. Now, we also know that Jesus was a master at asking questions, right? I mean, somebody counted all the questions that are documented in the Gospels. It's something like 284, and those are just the ones that were documented. So why is Jesus asking so many questions? Is it because he doesn't know a lot of things? No, it's because he knows the rhetorical effect and power of engaging someone using questions because it provokes a person's mind and their thinking. I love what Francis Schaeffer says. Schaeffer was a philosopher. He was an apologist and just a master at sitting down with people and just caring for who they are. And I want you to see what he says is the power of questions. He says this: if I have only an hour with someone, I'll spend the first 55 minutes asking them questions and finding out what is troubling their heart and their mind. And then in the last 5 minutes, I will share something of the truth. Now, that's pretty incredible because I bet a lot of us think that if we took this approach, we might have wasted our time. Suppose, for example, you have a neighbor, someone in your neighborhood who's a Muslim, and you have an hour with them, and you spend the first 55 minutes letting them share about their views, their belief, their religion, their convictions, and then you only spend 5 minutes at the very end sharing something about Jesus. I bet if that happened to one of us, we'd be tempted to think we messed up, we blew it. Why do we let them talk so much, you know? Or maybe you have a friend who identifies himself as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or non-binary, and you spend the first 55 minutes asking them questions, and they share about their life, their beliefs, their story. Maybe they grew up in the church and kind of what they experienced, and you only take 5 minutes at the very end to share something about what you believe to be true. I bet a lot of us might be tempted to think, oh man, we blew it. We squandered our opportunity. Why do we let them talk so much? But Schaeffer says, no, by all means, we should take that time to ask them questions, to find out what is going on inside them, to find out what's going on deep inside their soul. That way, when we do share something in those last 5 minutes, that something that we share will be exactly what they needed to hear. And we'll know what they needed to hear because we first took the time to ask them questions. We first take the time to invest in them. And so that's why questions are so important, because it helps us to better understand people before we open our mouths and say something that we think is true and relevant. Okay, now, there are 2 Columbo questions that I want you to commit to memory and to use every single day of your life, okay? And here's the first question. Its purpose is to help you to gain information. Gain information about them, their views, their beliefs, okay? And here's the key question that I want you to remember. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Notice how simple and easy it is to say that question. What do you mean by that? Okay? Now, technically, it doesn't have to be those exact words. It could be any question that gains information. Like, hey, tell me more about that. Hey, define for me that term you just used. Hey, tell me more about your views. Okay? Any of those work, but I like to remember one key phrase, like what do you mean by that, so that it becomes a part of my muscle memory, and it's just easier to say when I'm in an actual conversation, okay? So for example, people say to me all the time, Alan, all religions are basically the same, okay? Now, I'm not an expert in world religions. I mean, I do know something about religions, and I know that all religions are not the same, and maybe you know that they're not all the same. But when someone first says this to me, my response is not to give a 10 or 15-minute explanation as to why they're mistaken. Instead, my very first response to someone who says this is to use the Columbo tactic, to ask a Columbo question. And that's to simply say, hey, what do you mean by that? Notice how much easier it is to just simply, hey, what do you mean by that? Now think about it for a moment. When they say all religions are basically the same, you don't know what they mean by that, do you? Like maybe they mean all religions believe in the same God. Or maybe they mean all religions have the same morality. Or maybe they mean all religions have the same methodology of getting into heaven. And so when you ask them, what do you mean by what you just said here? They're now going to unpack and explain what they mean, maybe one of those 3 options, and then you'll better understand exactly what their view is, okay? Or sometimes people say, Alan, the Bible, it's not reliable, okay? Now, I could, if I wanted to, off the top of my head, give a 20-minute, discourse on why that statement is false, if I wanted. But I don't. I make my job 10 times easier by simply asking the Columbo question. Hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by it's not reliable? Now again, think about it. You don't know what they mean. Maybe they mean the Bible isn't reliable, a reliable source of history. Or maybe they mean the Bible isn't reliable when it speaks to scientific matters. Or maybe they mean the Bible isn't reliable because it hasn't been reliably transmitted for thousands of years, such that what the biblical authors wrote 2,000 plus years ago is what we have in our Bibles today. So when you ask them, well, what do you mean by reliable? They'll tell you which of those options is in their mind, and then you'll better understand their view. Okay? The same is true when it comes to abortion or evolution or stem cell research or whatever topic you're talking about. It's always a plus when you can use Columbo to say, hey, what do you mean by that? Tell me more about your views so that you can better understand exactly what they're talking about. And I forgot who it was who said, asking the questions can help you to clarify a misconception, because sometimes, we think we understand what a person is all about, but when we ask them questions, it oftentimes clarifies it. Like the whole I'm pro-choice. Sometimes when we find out that someone believes that abortion is morally permissible, and they say they're pro-choice, we might think that means they think abortion is okay throughout all 9 months of pregnancy and for virtually any reason. But oftentimes, a person's view is a little bit more complex than that. They might just think that abortion is okay unless it's for birth control reasons. Then you're like, oh, well, no, I think abortion in the case of birth control is wrong. Or maybe they think abortion is only okay in the first few trimester or first couple trimesters, but not in the third trimester. And so it's like, you can't just assume that just because they use the word pro-choice, you know exactly what their view is. And that's why it's helpful to ask the Columbo question. Hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by pro-choice? Okay. But ultimately, the purpose of this question is to help you understand exactly what their view is so you don't misunderstand it, and more importantly, so you don't misrepresent them. In fact, there is a mistake in logic where you take a person's view, you misrepresent that person's view in such a way where now their view looks more foolish, more stupid, and easier to attack. And then you attack this view rather than the view that they actually hold. Does anybody know what that mistake is called? What is it called when you misrepresent someone's view and then you attack that more foolish view? I bet some of you have heard of this. Yeah, okay. It's called straw man or straw man fallacy, okay? So the reason it's called straw man fallacy is because, consider this example. You probably know about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the famous actor or wrestler turned actor, right? Well, if you were confronted with the possibility of trying to attack Dwayne Johnson or try to knock him down, that sounds like a very intimidating thing. But what if you could create a straw man of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? Notice, a straw man is kind of like a real person, but a lot easier to knock down, right? Given the two options as to who to knock down, I'd go with the straw man version, right? And so this is the problem that might occur if you don't ask the Columbo question, what do you mean by that? It's quite likely that you might take their view and misrepresent it in such a way where now their view looks a lot more foolish, silly, and easier to knock down, and then you attack the straw man version of their view, not their actual version, okay? But the Columbo tactic will help you to avoid that. And it's really embarrassing to do that, to take a person's view, misrepresent it, and then you try to refute a view that they don't even hold. And then they're like, wait a minute, you just attacked a view that I don't even hold. Sounds like you're just kind of having a conversation with yourself. Do you want to have a conversation with me? Or do you want to talk to yourself? Like, it's ridiculous, right? So Columbo will help you to avoid that, okay? So that's the first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? And it'll help you to gain information. But I want you to also learn a second Columbo tactic. A second Columbo question. And this second question will not tell you what a person thinks, it'll tell you why a person thinks what they think. And it'll help you to do probably the most important thing in this presentation, which is to reverse the burden of proof. Now, before we get to the burden of proof, we have to first unpack what is an argument. Can anyone tell me what an argument is? And I'm not looking for a technical definition or a dictionary definition. I'm just looking for two key components to the definition of an argument. Does anyone want to take a stab at what an argument is? Yes. Okay, so you and somebody else debating a side. Okay, so that's partially correct. Yeah, so if you want to present an argument, you have to have a view, a claim, okay? But I'm going to tell you this, you don't even have to have another person to present an argument. I could just here all by myself stand up and present an argument. So yes, she's correct. You do have to have a view, a claim, but merely having a claim is not an argument. What else do I need to add to my claim that will turn my claim into an argument? Does anybody know? Yeah. Yes, proof, exactly. So an argument is basically composed of two things. Your claim, like what you believe is true, and evidence and reasons to support that claim. Notice a claim by itself is not an argument. You have to have evidence or reasons why that claim is true in order to turn your claim into an argument. So I like to use the illustration of a house. Okay, a house is like an argument, right? The roof is your claim, your belief, what you think is true, your opinion. And the walls hold up the roof. And the walls are your evidence and reasons. Okay? So notice, a roof on the ground is not a house. Okay? Don't ever buy such a property, okay? You have to have walls that are holding up the roof, right? So notice if, my son, he loves to play Call of Duty, recent episode, I think it's Warzone. Yeah, I think he prefers Warzone. Anybody play Warzone here? Nobody wants to admit it? Okay. That's okay. Yeah, that's bad stuff. Oh, Fortnite. Well, okay. Well, so to be fair, Call of Duty did pull a lot of cues from Fortnite because they had the whole, okay, you don't play, okay. You play Lego Star Wars? Yeah, that's way better. Okay. Or Minecraft, all right, fine. But so if my son comes to me and says, Dad, I want to play Warzone for the next, 5 hours straight. Okay, so he's made a claim. He's going to play Call of Duty for the next 5 hours straight. I say, why would I ever let you do that? He's like, well, because all my friends are going to be online, and it's a good opportunity for me to, shoot them and not do it in real life because you don't want to do it in a game. It's more fun and whatever. I'm like, okay. So he just presented an argument. Okay, I should play Call of Duty. Why? Because all my friends are online. That's an argument. Now, it's not a very convincing argument, but it's an argument because it's a claim with evidence or reasons to back it up. Or when my wife picks me up from the airport tonight. Yeah, tonight. I'll be flying back tonight. And we're driving home, and she's like, hey, do you want to pick up something to eat on the way home? I'm like, sure, let's go to Taco Bell. Okay, now I've just made a claim. We should go to Taco Bell for dinner. Now, my wife is a health nut, so she's going to say, well, why would we ever go to Taco Bell? Like, it's not a healthy thing to do. So I pull out a coupon. 2 tacos for $1. Okay, great deal. So notice now I've presented a claim, we should go to Taco Bell, and my reason is I have a coupon. So I've made an argument, right? So notice we make arguments all the time, and there's nothing argumentative about an argument. It can be very calm and whatever, If you're after school one day, you're like, hey, what should we do? You're like, hey, let's go watch a movie. Why? Oh, because the new, Guardians of the Galaxy, is out. You just made an argument. Again, there's nothing wrong with arguments. They're good. We make arguments all day long, maybe not realizing it. So that's all an argument is your claim with evidence or reasons to back it up, all right? Now, with that understanding of what an argument is, here's the key question and the most important concept I want you to learn in this presentation. What is the burden of proof? Can anyone tell me what the burden of proof is? This is kind of a legal term that's used in a lot of kind of court situations. Does anybody know what the burden of proof is? So here's how I'll define it. The burden of proof is the responsibility that someone has to give evidence or reasons for their view. And here's how the burden of proof rule works. Whoever makes a claim, it's their job to bear the burden of proof, okay? Whoever makes a claim, it's their job to bear the burden of proof. So if you say, I believe X or Y or Z, it's your job to provide evidence for it. It's not the other person's job to show why you're mistaken. So let me give you an example. Young man, I met you earlier. What's your name again? Caleb? That's right. So suppose I claim Caleb stole my car. Caleb's like, I didn't steal your car. I'm like, yeah, you stole my car. You're like, dude, you drive like a 1998 Honda CR-V. Like, who cares about that car? I'm like, no, you stole my car. So we don't agree. So we end up going to court. Okay, so now we're in court. I've made the claim that Caleb has stolen my car. Let me ask you a question. Whose job is it to present evidence for their view? Me or Caleb? Whose job is it first to do that? Me, right. Because I'm the one who made the claim. So I have to first present evidence that he stole my car before I have presented an argument. Now, suppose I present 0 evidence that he stole my car. Does Caleb have to say anything in that courtroom? No. He can walk out that courtroom and he's completely innocent because I never made any evidence to support my claim. I did not turn my claim into an argument. Now, suppose, however, I pull out my phone and I have a Ring app, Ring is that camera system that you can buy from Amazon or whatever, and I show all this video footage of Caleb breaking into my garage and stealing my beautiful 1998 Honda CR-V. Okay? Now I've turned my claim that he stole my car into an argument because I presented evidence for my view. Then and only then does Caleb have any obligation to respond. Until I present evidence, he doesn't have to say a thing. So that's how the burden of proof rule works, okay? So if a Christian and a non-Christian are talking, and the non-Christian says all religions are basically the same, who's made the claim, the Christian or the non-Christian? The non-Christian. So who bears the burden of proof, the Christian or the non-Christian? The non-Christian, exactly. Because they made the claim, it's their job to back it up. Now suppose a Christian says to a non-Christian, hey, I believe God is real. Now who's made the claim, the Christian or the non-Christian? Yeah, the Christian. So whose job is it then to provide evidence for their view, the Christian or the non-Christian? Yeah, the Christian, exactly. So it works both ways. Whoever makes a claim, it's their job to bear the burden of proof. Now, on your handout notes, it says we need to stop giving people free rides. And this is the number one mistake I see people making, I see Christians making. Let me describe for you what a free ride is. A Christian and a non-Christian are talking, and all of a sudden the non-Christian says something like, hey, all religions are basically the same. Now, the non-Christian has made the claim, they haven't provided an argument because they haven't given any evidence. They've just made the claim, all religions are basically the same. And here's what the Christian does. The Christian says, oh, no, they're not. They're not all the same. Because you see, in Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. And in Islam, he's not the Son of God. He's just a prophet. And in Judaism, he's not the Son of God or a prophet. He's just a mere human being. So you see, they can't be the same. Different religions contradict each other. The Christian goes off for 5 or 10 minutes trying to explain why a person's claim is mistaken. That is giving them a free ride because the Christian has taken on the burden of proof when it does not belong to them. They've taken on the responsibility of providing evidence when the other person hasn't even presented an argument. Brothers and sisters, listen to me very carefully. It is not your job to respond to people's claims. Because it's very, very easy for a person to present a claim, an opinion, with no evidence, no reason. It's not even grounded in reality. And now what? We as Christians are responsible for responding to it? If you go around life thinking that you have to respond to every person's claim or opinion, you will never want to share your faith. Because it's an impossible burden to bear. It's too difficult to have to try to show why anyone who can invent any claim is mistaken. But that's what happens, is we take the bait. A non-Christian presents some ridiculous claim with no evidence, so they have not presented an argument, all they presented is a claim, and now the Christian says, oh, I gotta show why they're mistaken. No, you don't. You need to make them shoulder the burden of proof and not take on the burden of proof. And the way you do that is to have Columbo help you out. And here's the key question that I want you to learn. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? Now, again, you don't have to memorize those exact words. I have, and I recommend you do. But any question that asks them, why should I believe what you just said? They've made a claim, and now you're going to ask them, why is that claim true? After all, if you made a claim, they'd ask you why you believe that's true. So you're not doing anything illogical or unreasonable. This is not a trick. This is the gracious, logical, and reasonable thing to ask. They make a claim, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And if they can't provide walls to the roof they just gave you, they have not presented you a house. They have not given you an argument. And if they haven't presented an argument, you have no obligation to respond. Just like Caleb would have no obligation to defend himself if I didn't present any evidence that he stole my car. So stop giving people free rides. If they make a claim, ask them to shoulder the burden of proof. Ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? So again, somebody says to me, the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times, you can't possibly know that what the biblical authors wrote is what we have in our Bibles today. Okay, is that a claim or is that an argument? Tell me out loud. Claim or an argument? Claim. Yeah, it's a claim. Yeah, there's no evidence there. It's just this claim. Now, there's nothing wrong with someone believing that, but do not interpret this as an argument. So if that's just a claim, what do they need to turn it into an argument? What's that? Yeah, proof, evidence, reasons, okay? So since they have not, your question should not be to try to refute that or show why that's mistaken. Your question should just be to ask the Columbo question. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And then wait and listen to see if they have any proof. See if they can provide walls to that roof that's on the ground. Somebody might say, well, Jesus taught reincarnation after he traveled to India. Now, you don't have to be some historian or a Jesus scholar or whatever to respond to this, okay? Now, keep in mind, this is not an argument. Again, it's just a claim without any evidence. People are allowed to believe that, but don't treat it as if it's an argument, okay? What question could you ask to reverse the burden of proof back on them and make them shoulder the burden of trying to give evidence for their view? What would be the question? Yeah. Okay, yeah, do you have proof that Jesus traveled to India? Or you could just simply ask the question that I already mentioned. How did you come to that conclusion? But yeah, the way you phrase it is just as fine as well, okay? The universe came into existence by itself. Again, that's just a claim. It's not an argument. So my question to them would be, how did you come to that conclusion? All religions are based the same. How did you come to that conclusion? The Bible is full of fables and myths. How did you come to that conclusion? Every living thing came from a single cell life form. How did you come to that conclusion? Science has proven the Bible wrong. How did you come to that conclusion? Notice, every single one of those statements is just a claim. It's just an opinion. Yeah, it's okay if they believe that, but don't treat it as if it's an argument. Don't try to be like, oh my gosh, I got to show why that's false. Because now you're giving them a free ride. You're taking on the burden when the burden doesn't belong to you, and you're making the task of evangelism 100 times harder than it needs to be, okay? Remember, if they give you a roof on the ground, don't treat it like a house. Just have Columbo help you out. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Now, this question is important for all the same reasons that questions are important, right? Notice this question shows interest in a person's viewpoint, right? Notice it buys you valuable time, right? It also gives you more material to work with. Sometimes a person will say to me, hey, the Bible isn't reliable. And you're like, oh man, shoot, how do I respond to that? So when you ask them, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Guess what's going to happen? They're now going to take 5 or 10 minutes to try to unpack their reasons or their explanation. And guess what you can do during that time? Catch your breath, collect your thoughts, relax for a moment, pay attention to what they're saying. And so it gives you some extra time to think and listen. And maybe something they'll say will trigger your memory. You'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what I can say here, okay? So by asking that question and putting the burden of proof back on them, now they're in the hot seat, they're answering, you got some free time, okay, to think, right? And to listen, of course. But also asking the question, how did you come to that conclusion, graciously assumes that they have reasons and evidence for their view, and they're not just simply giving emotion or just making assertions. But here's the thing. Do not be surprised if when you ask them, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Do not be surprised if they just give you a blank stare, right? So they say, well, the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times, you can't possibly know that what it says is true. So you say, oh, really? Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And they say this, oh, shoot. So I was reading this meme on Facebook, and I'm sorry, what did you say? Yeah, I read that on a meme on Facebook. You read it on a meme? So you believe everything that you read on memes on Facebook? Well, yeah. And I'm not kidding. They'll say that because they're just seeing some urban legend that's being propagated on the internet that has no factual basis, and they're repeating it, right? See, they're not used to Christians asking them to shoulder the burden of proof. They're used to Christians giving them a free ride. They're used to being able to just throw out some ridiculous claim like the Bible's been translated and retranslated so many times, and just expecting the Christian to freak out. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to respond to this? And while they're sitting back going, look at this Christian struggling to try to respond to my claim. But see, that's totally illegitimate. If you feel you got to respond to that, you are giving them a free ride. You're taking on the burden when the burden doesn't belong to you. If they make a claim, make them shoulder the burden of proof. And of course, Columbo is the one who's going to help you to do that. Okay? So ultimately, this question, how did you come to that conclusion, puts the burden of proof back on them where the burden usually belongs. Now, here are a number of statements I've heard recently when engaging non-Christians, all right? So let's take the first one. All wars have been started by religion. Is that a claim or is that an argument? It's a claim. Should you respond to that claim with a 5 or 10 minute explanation as to why it's mistaken? No, because if you did, you'd be giving them what? A free ride, exactly. And that means you're taking on the burden when it doesn't belong to you. So what Columbo question could you ask them to make them shoulder the burden of proof? What's that? You said it. Just it. Yeah, how did you come to that conclusion? Yeah, hey, interesting opinion. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And wait to see if they give you an answer. If they don't give a reason or evidence, they haven't presented an argument. How about the next one? The theory of evolution explains the way all species emerged. Is that a claim or is that an argument? It's a claim, exactly. Are people allowed to believe that, by the way? Sure. But don't treat it like an argument. It's not a house, it's a roof on the ground. So what question could you ask to make them shoulder the burden of proof? Yes, how did you come to that conclusion? Okay, let's try another one here. How about Muhammad was a prophet of God? Is that a claim or an argument? Claim. Should you respond to that claim with a 10-minute explanation as to why it's mistaken? No, because if you did, you'd be giving them what? A free ride, exactly. So what question should you ask to make them shoulder the burden of proof? How did you come to that conclusion? Okay, how about this? The Bible's been corrupted. What question could you ask them? How did you come to that conclusion? The unborn is just a clump of cells. Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Exactly. Okay? Again, this is not a trick. Okay? They've made the claim, they have to bear the burden. You're just enforcing the burden of proof rule. All right? Now, suppose, actually, let me give you one qualification here. This is a trick that sometimes people will play back onto us when we ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? We call it the professor's ploy, only because it happens a lot of times in a college or university setting, but it can happen even in a conversation that you have with a person, okay, as an individual relationship. But let me give you the example in a university. You know, you might be in a lecture hall, there's 100 students at this college, and the professor's talking about, I don't know, U.S. history. Okay, it's a history class. Professor's talking about U.S. history, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the lecture, he says, you know what? The Bible is full of fables and myths. And everyone's like, wait, what in the world? I thought we were talking about U.S. history. Like, where did that come from? By the way, this actually happens. I'm not exaggerating, okay? So there might be a Christian in the room who's like, I'm going to use my tactics, okay? So the Christian raises his hand, says, Professor, hey, you just made a claim that the Bible's full of fables and myths. Do you have any evidence to back up your claim? Now, what is the student doing? He's using the Columbo tactic, right? He's asking the professor to give evidence or reasons for his view. He's asking him to shoulder the burden of proof, which is the appropriate thing to ask. But here's the problem. The professor's smart, okay? He's had Christians come and go through his class for decades. And so here's how he handles that challenge. He says, young man, thank you for that question. I appreciate that question. Look, I'm not here to impose my views on everyone in the class. I'm an open-minded kind of guy, and I'm willing to consider other people's viewpoints. So young man, I will give you the floor and allow you right now to explain why the Bible is trustworthy and true. Now, what has the professor just done? That's right. He shifted the burden of proof back on the student. Is that where the burden belongs? No. So if you were in that situation, you should not take that bait, okay? You should be like, wait a minute, professor. Wait, you're the one who made the claim. We're just the students sitting here listening. You made the claim. It's your job to back it up. Do you have any evidence to support what you just said? Or should we just take everything that you say on faith? No, don't say that. That's kind of cocky and condescending, okay? But you do want to recognize that happens. Now that's a university setting, but you could be having that happen even in a situation with someone. Like you go to Uncle Bob's house for Easter, okay? And you're chilling there with Uncle Bob outside. It's a barbecue, and Uncle Bob's like a skeptic or an atheist, and he knows you're a Christian. So Uncle Bob comes up to you and is like, hey, you know what? All religions are basically the same. And so you're like, Uncle Bob, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And Uncle Bob's like, oh, so you think Christianity is the only true religion? Well, prove it. So what has Uncle Bob just done? Yeah, the professor's ploy. He's just shifted the burden back on you. He made the claim, and now he's making you defend some view that you have not even expressed at this point. So you've got to be mindful that this will happen, okay? You ask them to shoulder the burden of proof, and they put it back on you, and that's a trick, okay? Now, suppose, though, you ask them, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? And let's just say they give you evidence. Let's say they give you a reason. Let's say they turn their claim into an actual argument. Then, and only then, should you feel an obligation to try to say, okay, hey, thanks for your argument. Let me try to respond to it, okay? Just like Caleb would only have to give a defense in court if and only if I presented evidence that he stole my car. So now I presented evidence, he's got to respond. Maybe now you've asked, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? The non-Christian or the skeptic has given you an argument. Then and only then should you respond. Now, what if you don't know how to respond? What if you're like, oh my gosh, I've never heard that before, okay? Here's how I handle that, because this happens to me all the time. When someone presents an argument and I don't know how to respond to it, here's what I say. First, I acknowledge their point. I say, hey, man, thanks for that argument. I've never heard that before. That's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Then I ask, can I think about that for a couple of days and get back to you? Now, by the way, I've never had anybody say to me at that point, no, Alan, we want you to respond right now at this moment. It's like people are like, yeah, sure. You want to think about it? Go home and think about it. Fine. Okay. Maybe it's a classmate at school. You're like, hey, can I think about this for a couple of days and get back to you? No problem. You go home and then you research the question. You research the argument. You try to figure out how can you understand that particular argument. And maybe you would go to our website, str.org, where we have all kinds of free resources to answer challenging questions. coldcasechristianity.com or reasonablefaith.org. These are all websites of my friends that have amassed all kinds of research and answers to challenging questions, okay? Maybe you can call Mark up and ask him, right? He loves to do his quiet time between 3 and 4 a.m., so that's the best time to call him, okay? His number is 224-331-6555. Just give him a call. He loves questions at 3 a.m. So I'm just kidding. That's not even his phone number, not even the area code, right? So anyways, but the point is, you go home, you do your research, and then you come back 3 days later and say, hey, I was thinking about that argument you told me back, a couple days ago. And here's my thought about it. And you respond. So notice, you don't have to have the answer right away. It's okay if you go home and investigate the question and get a response, okay? So that's how I handle it. By the way, if you do this every time you're confronted with an argument that you don't know how to respond to, you know what's going to happen after 2, 3, 4 years? You're going to have an incredible education. You're going to have learned so much just on your own. And what you'll discover is many non-Christians give the same objections over and over again. And I don't know if you've ever been to a situation where there's been like somebody like me, maybe at a conference, and they stand up and they say, hey, ask me any questions about Christianity. And this person's like able to answer questions from anyone in the crowd, almost on any topic. And you're like, how in the world can they do that? It's not because they're special or a genius or an Einstein. It's because they've been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years. And pretty soon you discover, oh yeah, all the same questions just get asked over and over again. And when you have a handle on like 10, 12, 20, 30 of them, you pretty much can handle any question. It's crazy, okay? Okay, so notice, remember at the beginning I said I have a promise to make you? And the promise was I'm going to give you a game plan. that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation on any topic, no matter how little you think you know about the topic, and no matter how articulate, educated, or aggressive the other person might be. Here's your game plan. 2 Columbo questions. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? The first tells you what they believe. The second question tells you why they believe it. And you can use these 2 questions in any situation with anyone. So suppose you were going to get on an airplane and fly from, so I'm going to fly tonight from Washington Dulles Airport to San Diego. It's like a 5-hour flight. It's a long time. And so you might be thinking, okay, I'm going to get on a flight. I got 5 hours. I'm feeling really confident about my faith. Maybe I'm going to read my Bible on the airplane, and the person sitting next to me might see me reading it and ask me a question that I can share my faith, okay? And you know why this works, by the way, because whenever you're on an airplane, I don't know if you guys have flown at all, right? If you're sitting on an airplane and you notice somebody opens up a book or their laptop, what does everybody do? They lean over and look. Oh, look what he's reading. Oh, yeah. Right? Everybody does that thing where they just look with their eyes, but not with their head, because you don't want to be obvious that you're like staring at their laptop. But you just kind of do that thing with your eyes. Yeah, right? And so everybody does that. You do that. They do that. And so you whip out your Bible, because you know they're going to do that, right? So you whip it out your Bible. You start reading the Gospels, right? Somewhere thinking about Jesus. And then you notice the person sitting next to you, they're doing that thing. Right? They're looking, and you're like, oh, yeah. You're like, yeah, I got a live one. I'm ready to go, okay? So the plane takes off. You're like, okay, I'm going to make my move. So you turn to them, you say, hey, I noticed you're checking out what I'm reading here in the Bible. I'm reading the Gospels about Jesus. Would you mind if I tell you about what I just read here about Jesus of Nazareth? And as you're talking to them, you notice the person that you're speaking to is Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist in the planet. And you're like, oh, shoot, I'm going to die, okay? But no, you're not, because you know who's got your back? Columbo, yes, that's right. Every once in a while somebody says Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, there's Jesus, but there's Columbo, right? Really close second, okay? Columbo's got your back. So here's what you do. You just go into Columbo mode. Because you know if you try to go head to head with somebody like Richard Dawkins, even though you know the truth and he's got falsehood, you're still going to be outmaneuvered because he's just so slick and so clever. So instead of trying to go head to head with him, just go into Columbo mode. Be like, hey, Professor Dawkins, tell me more about that. Oh, I see. What do you mean by that? Oh, okay. Hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Oh, okay. Just go into fact-finding mode, okay? And man, when the plane lands, Dawkins will be running away from you. Like, he's like, oh my gosh, get me out of the way. This Christian's crazy. No. So notice, this game plan works with anybody, anytime, any situation. All right, a couple of quick points here, then we're going to be dismissed. I live in San Diego, right next to this Marine Corps base called Camp Pendleton. And actually, there's a bunch of bases in San Diego. So a bunch of my friends are in the military, and they often will tell me this. They say, Alan, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. And what they mean by that is that the more you practice your tactics and your skills with your friends and your buddies, the more proficient you become, and the less likely when you are in the field to get injured, shot, and bleed and die or whatever, okay? And the same is true with the Columbo tactic. Practice this Columbo tactic today, tomorrow, with your friends, with your family, with your church members, because as you say, hey, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? It becomes a part of your muscle memory, and then when you're in a more hostile conversation, it's much more easier to say if you said it regularly in just everyday conversation. Second point is this. I know this sounds kind of like not churchy thing to say, but don't feel compelled to present the gospel in every conversation. Sometimes we Christians have been told, like, okay, if you're talking to a non-Christian, you better present the gospel, right? And here's what ends up happening. We don't do that, so we either feel super guilty that we didn't present the gospel, or we try to force the gospel in a conversation where there isn't even a natural kind of connection to talking about the gospel. Like maybe your friend just got a new phone. You're like, hey man, I noticed you got a new phone. And your friend's like, yeah man, you like it? It's an iPhone 13. You're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Hey, how come you got an iPhone and not an Android phone? Your friend's like, Well, because I don't know, I really like the app ecosystem, and I think the resale value on the iPhones is a little bit better than the Android phones. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. I can see why you chose to buy an iPhone. Why don't you also choose to follow Jesus Christ? And they're like, whoa, like, wait, what happened? We were just talking about phones. Now you're talking about Jesus. Like, what is that? Like, don't be that guy or gal that just tries to like shoehorn the gospel in a conversation where it's not there. Like, it's just awkward. You sound goofy, okay? So instead of making that your goal, here's a more modest goal. Just make it your goal to put a stone in their shoe. You know when you get a stone in your shoe, every time you walk, that stone pokes you in the sole of your foot, and you can't stop thinking about it, right? Use the Columbo tactic to provoke them by asking them, provoke their thinking, to provoke their thinking by asking them, hey, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And that way, that'll put a stone in their shoe, give them something to think about. Maybe the Holy Spirit then can use what you've said, use that conversation to maybe convict them of the idea that you're trying to bring up, or to convict them of sin, or whatever it might be, okay? So I like what Mother Teresa says. This is from her book, Love, a Fruit That Is Always in Season. She says, look, God's not called me to be successful. He's called me to be faithful. Remember, it's not your job to convince people of your position or to turn them into Christians, okay? That's God's job. Your job is to present the truth in a clear, persuasive way, the gospel, and then leave the results up to the Holy Spirit, right? Don't be committed to the end result. Just be committed to your part, which is to be an ambassador for Jesus, to present the message of reconciliation, and then let God deal with the results, okay? All right. That's all I have. Should we take a couple questions, or are we out of time for now? Or
So we got time for one or two questions real quick. If you've got more questions, just hang on to them because we'll have another Q&A at the end of the next segment, okay? But Lou's here, so if anybody's got any questions, we can take one or two right now.
yeah, yes, over here.
So when you're coming to a friend that like is already a Christian and they know a broad view of
So your friend is a Christian already? Okay, but they're not displaying any fruit in their life? Or
right, but I think they may not like comprehend everything that you're telling them.
okay, so they're a professing Christian, but they're not comprehending everything you're telling them about Christianity?
Yeah, sorry. That's,
Okay. Okay, so I understand that, yeah. So your question is what then?
how do you, how if you've been like with them for a long time
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh, so they're not putting their faith in Christ, so they're not a Christian.
right, so, but they know that.
They've heard the gospel, but they haven't put their trust in Christ. Okay, no, that's fine. I thought you said at first that they are a Christian. Okay.
They claim. Well, no, wait.
Do they go to a church?
The occasional holiday.
Occasional holiday? Okay. Well, I was going to say, because ideally, like, their church or their parents, are their parents Christians?
Kind of the same situation.
Kind of same situation. Okay. Well, yeah. So that's difficult because it's like they got part of it. So, I would do a couple things. Number one, I'd commit to prayer for them on a regular basis because obviously no one comes to faith in Christ apart from the work of the Holy Spirit. No matter how many arguments you have, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much you serve them, ultimately it's the Holy Spirit's going to bring them to repentance. So number one, pray for them. Number two, just continue to be faithful to be a friend that loves them and cares for them. Spend time with them and just continue to encourage them to pursue reading the scriptures. Maybe invite them to your youth group here. I don't know if they're local or not, but I would just continue to get them plugged into whatever you're doing at church. It sounds like they're open to this, so that's a good sign. So they might be open to then attending various events that you have here in the youth group or whatever. So, I mean, I don't know if there's any real specific answer to this situation other than to continue to pursue them, pray for them, share the gospel with them as best you can. And then also remember, you're not ultimately responsible for their salvation, but you're just responsible for being faithful to keep communicating them to them and praying for them. That's the main thing, I'd say. Good, yeah, over here.
What if they're a staunch Catholic? And they won't, like, how would you approach that? They know Jesus is Lord, but
Yeah. Yeah, so that's tough when they're a staunch Catholic because most likely they're probably very invested in attending Mass on a regular basis. And the Catholic Church is different because, where we would say we believe in the full authority of Scripture, they have two additional authorities, right? They have the teaching magisterium of the Church and the papacy, and the Bible. So they have three sources of authority. So it makes it difficult because you could say something about what the Bible teaches that might seem to be against Catholic doctrine, but to say, well, according to the Pope's teaching or according to church history and tradition, we have this other belief. So yeah, it is difficult. Do they attend Mass on a regular basis? Yeah, because that's a mortal, for them, it's a mortal sin if you don't attend Mass, which...
She's 83, so.
She's 83?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard for her to attend Mass on a daily basis.
Yeah, not a daily basis, but a weekly basis for them. They're required, yeah. So so how are you connected to this 83-year-old? She's a great-grandma. Oh, okay. Wow. So is this your mother or your father's mother? Your mother's mother. And is your mother a believer? Okay. So is your grandmother open to you talking to her about your faith?